Hey everybody, and welcome back to Berlin Snapshots with me, Nick Jackson. There's an anniversary this week from World War II that I want to share with you, and there are two reasons why I'm doing it here. First up, this is the Allied War Cemetery on the limits of West Berlin. Just over there is the rubble mountain where they dumped 75 million cubic metres of broken Berlin as it was being rebuilt after the war. On top of that was a spy station listening deep into Soviet territory. You might remember that, it still stands today, and it was used as the film set for the Netflix film or series Berlin Station. But the Nazi period has produced more documentation than any other period of history, books, films, etc., etc. But inevitably there's a myth and a romance that creep into it, certainly the films. And the best example of that would be the film The Great Escape, with a star-studded Hollywood cast headed by Steve McQueen and his motorbike. It's important in a place like this to remember the realities of what was an unprecedented and horrendous period of conflict and barbarity. But the Great Escape took place this week in 1944 from a camp called Stalag Luft 3, where over 10,000 airmen from all denominations of the Western Allies would be kept. And in 1944, the tunnel escape took place, leading to the death of 50 of those prisoners, and one of them, Dennis Street, is buried in this cemetery. In Britain, POW camps are synonymous with another of those kind of post-war industries, books and films about prisoner escapes, and the most famous in Britain POW camp would become known as Colditz Castle, and here lies Mike Sinclair, known to the Germans as the Red Fox, one of the great escapers from Colditz who actually died there. He is also buried here, and those are the two stories that we're going to follow today. Now, both Stalag Luft 3, which was an Air Force camp, 5 compounds, it was started in 1942, had over 10,000 prisoners in. By the time it was evacuated in 1945, they were both, that Stalag Luft 3 and Colditz, built for the same reason. It's surprisingly how ill prepared German forces are for POWs and catering for them as they start falling into enemy hands, mainly in 1940. First camps were awful, but once they'd started a camp system, people start to escape, and the majority of people escape through tunnels. So Stalag Luft 3 would be built with raised barracks. If you go there now, the most visible remains in the forest are the brick pilings where the barracks used to sit on, concrete floors for washrooms, even concrete sinks, all now just lying about in a forest. It's kind of an interesting place. But you can't dig a tunnel from a raised barrack that you can see underneath. But they underestimated what the prisoners were capable of, and we don't need to go into the details because I'm sure you know the story of Tom, Dick and Harry. But Tunnel Harry, the one that was successful this week in 1944, was dug through the foundations that then sat below, in the space below the barrack, from a stove from the cooking area, organised by a man called Roger Bushell. The tunnel would break on the 24th of March 1944, and 76 men got out of that tunnel. They then scattered all over Germany. Many were caught quite close by. It was freezing cold, still covered with snow, the countryside at the time. And eventually 76 of them that had escaped would be arrested. Roger Bushell would be one of the 50 then murdered after that escape, and one of them lies here. The man who organised the list of the 50 from the 76 escapees to die was a man called Arthur Niebuhr. Arthur Niebuhr was an incredibly checkered career. He was heavily involved in the massacres of innocent Jewish men, women and children with the Einsatzgruppen, the special murderous task forces during the invasion of the Soviet Union. Eventually he'd be executed for being involved in the Stauffenberg plot to bring Hitler down. But in between, he gets a list of the prisoners and he decides who lives and dies, according to eyewitness accounts, on these sort of criteria. If you're a bit older, if you're married, maybe you've got kids, he might spare you. But if you didn't, you were for the chop. Some were killed way up in northern Germany. Bushell was murdered in Saarbrücken, southwest on the French border. But Dennis Street was captured very quickly and would be murdered in a place called Breslau. All of the 50 that died had their bodies cremated to hide the crime, and they were returned, and the urns were kept in a shrine built by prisoners in a graveyard not far from the camp. But by the end of the war, the bodies were moved to a place called Poznan in Poland. Now that was under Soviet-controlled territory, and the Street family decided they wanted to move his body here, and now Dennis lies just over here. Let's go and have a look. So here he lies, Dennis Street, aged 21. Now, Colditz Castle was a castle in Saxony. It was 1,000 years old. It was built for the royalty of the state of Saxony, for the Saxon royal family. And that was where they put hostage prisoners, so high-profile prisoners, people who kept escaping, because a castle built on rock is very difficult to build a tunnel from. But ultimately, Colditz, with a remarkable group of men with a remarkable set of skills, give an example, there was a Dutch guy in Colditz called Van Doornik. Stopped the prisoners picking all the locks and getting out from room to room. They replaced the locks with the Zeiss icon cruciform, so cross-shaped security locks. What Van Doornik did was he built a Zeiss icon cruciform lock measuring device, so he could measure depressions and the teeth of the lock itself. And then once he'd got the information, he could make the reverse, the key, so depressions become teeth and teeth become depressions. He then gave it to one of the British prisoners who used it to open the door and disappear. Amazing. But Mike Sinclair would become one of the most famous escapees from Colditz. He was known for certainly one epic escape. Guarding the perimeter were with barbed wire and searchlights and guard towers were 24 hours a day German guards. One of the sergeant majors in charge of those guards was a Bavarian called Rothenberger. Short, podgy guy with a great big moustache. The prisoners called him Franz Joseph. So Mike Sinclair, who had similar coloured hair and was a similar height, they decided that they were going to create the uniform and Franz Joseph or Rothenberger's moustache. They made that out of shaving brushes. They made guard uniforms, they made fake weaponry, and jumped out of a window as marched up to the gate, and the fake Franz Joseph Rothenberger Mike Sinclair, so convincing, dismissed the German guards, replaced them with his fellow prisoners, and they almost organised a mass escape. Eventually it failed, even though the initial guards were completely taken in by the scam. Sinclair was shot but recovered quite quickly after that, but by 1944 he'd had enough. Now, Roger Bushell, who organised the Great Escape, and Mike Sinclair have got something in common. They were both captured very early in the war. Sinclair at Calais, Bushell at Dunkirk. So by 1944 they were prepared to take more risks, having been in the cage for over 4 years, and it would cost them both their lives. Sinclair had also heard in September of 1944 that his brother had been killed in action. So, without telling anyone, down in the field, which was then below Colditz, surrounded by a 2-metre high rough wooden stake and wire fence, he just climbs over it and starts to run. Prisoners and guards are shouting at him to stop. It seemed like a doomed attempt from the beginning, but he doesn't, and in an attempt to bring him down, they shot at him and it caught him on the elbow. But unfortunately the bullet ricocheted and went straight through his heart, and the Red Fox fell dead. His body was then buried in Colditz Castle, and it was exhumed at the end of the 1940s. I actually know an old buffer in Colditz who was there as a young boy watching that. He remembers it because A, it was raining, B, he met Americans for the first time, and C, they gave him a banana, the first of his life, and that memory stuck with him. But Mike Sinclair also lies here. 2 of the great escape stories, Dennis Street from The Great Escape, and Mike Sinclair from Colditz, and the Red Fox now lies just over here. So here you can see Albert Michael Sinclair's grave. Now, one of the things I've got to check as I leave is that the gate is closed because there's a danger of wild boar. Kind of like living in a place where there's a danger of wild boar. A few years ago I was here, someone had left that gate open and all of the lawn had been truffled up by hordes of boar. But this would gladden the heart of our prisoners. The tunnellers are still here.